How's it going? Adam Drake here, and today I'm going to show you how I shim a nitro clutch. So you'll be able to use these tips and method with any nitro clutch. There are a few things to look for depending on the clutch you're using, but this will just kind of be a general way of how I shim a nitro clutch. And again, just to make sure that your clutch and engine are able to perform and make it through the long main events. Okay, so here we have a closer look. This is one of my Race 83 engines from OS with a ProTech 4-shoe clutch. So it's currently shimmed the way that I would put it in my car and the way I feel is the proper way of shimming. So hopefully you can see here, if I move the bell, it just barely rocks back and forth. So you want to have about 0.2 millimeters of end play so that when everything gets hot, or if any dust or anything kind of starts to wear or expand, you have just a little bit of end play. If it's shimmed too tight, that's actually worse than having a little bit too much end play. So we'll pull this apart and I'll show you kind of how I have the stack up when using OS engine and ProTech clutch. So what you want to, first thing that you'll want to look for or be careful is if you have no shims behind the inner bearing, when you put the bell on, you can see it won't spin, and then you can kind of hear that noise where it's rubbing. Well, what's happening is this bearing isn't sitting off the clutch nut far enough to where when the bell drops on, the bell is actually just barely rubbing the tips of the flywheel pins. So if I add one shim, it will probably be enough to where now you can see it spins free. Even if I push in, there's no rubbing. But if I look from the side here through the vent tubes, it's still really close. So that shim that I put on was just a 0.2. So now I will go ahead and add a second 0.2 millimeter shim, and spins free. You want to look from this angle and make sure that you can't see the clutch shoes through the gap from the end of the bell to the flywheel, because as you start to increase the amount of shims you have behind that inner bearing, the bell will come out. Next thing you know, you'll have a big gap between the clutch bell and the flywheel, and you'll start to see the clutch shoes. If you can see the clutch shoes, then you're not getting the full engagement of the shoe into the bell. But when this is pushed all the way on, you no longer see the shoes. The shoes are getting the full surface area and engagement onto the bell. Now, if I leave this one outer shim off and I go ahead and secure the screw, you'll see the amount of end play is too much. Now, if there's too much end play, this bell can move back and forth. It can be a little bit harsher on the bearings. But again, I would rather have slightly too much end play than it being too tight. If it's too tight, when you tighten down this screw, it will actually crush the bearings. It'll put kind of a side load on the bearings to where that extra force on the bearings is going to create more drag, more heat, more chance of flaming out at idle, and just all around cause some headaches. One thing I've done a video on, this screw, this is the OS clutch retaining screw. You can use just a standard 3mm screw with a washer, just be careful. A lot of the cap head screws, the head's broached very deep, so if you tighten that down really tight, sometimes the head will break off. There's also a bunch of companies that make titanium in different 5.5mm hex heads. I also recommend staying away from those. They look cool, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure you have something that's super durable, and the OS clutch retaining screw is the best that I've found. So again, we'll check here. When I push in, there's no binding, nothing's rubbing. When I pull out on the clutch bell, nothing is binding or rubbing. When you spin it, everything spins nice and free. And what I like to do sometimes too is just, if you spin it, just kind of change the angle or orientation and make sure that it continues to spin free, that there's no drag at any time. You want to make sure that this bell spins nice and free, but also that you have just a little bit of end play, and that should help keep your engine and clutch working and performing properly to ensure that you can make it through those long main events.